And it is day 232 of the second Trump administration. Today, House Democrats released an image of the birthday message Donald Trump allegedly sent to sex offender Jeffrey Epstein back in 2003. It shows the outline of a naked woman with the text of an imagined conversation between Trump and Epstein where they have agreed they have certain things in common. Then Trump says, enigmas never age. Have you noticed that? Trump's alleged signature is at the bottom, in between the woman's hips. The letter was part of the documents the House Oversight Committee subpoenaed from Epstein's estate. The Wall Street Journal reported on the existence of it earlier this year, and Trump sued the paper for $10 billion, denying he had anything to do with it. Today, the White House is still denying that it's the president's signature on the letter and said Trump plans to press ahead with this lawsuit. An attorney for more than 200, I just want to remind our audience, 200 Epstein survivors responded to the release saying the following, quote, President Trump's hypocrisy has been most frustrating for the victims. He told the public the Epstein story should go away, yet filed a $10 billion lawsuit that only magnifies the very issue he wants silenced. With today's release, the least he could do is withdraw that lawsuit and publicly apologize to the journalist he attacked, end quote. In addition to the so-called birthday book, the Oversight Committee released more documents this evening, including Epstein's last will and testament, his infamous non-prosecution agreement with the U.S. attorney in Florida, his contact books spanning nearly 30 years, and information about his bank accounts. We're also learning more about Epstein's finances and how they played a role in his crimes. The New York Times published a massive investigation that found J.P. Morgan Chase, quote, spent years supporting and profiting from the notorious sex offender, ignoring red flags, suspicious activity, and concerned executives. With that, let's get smarter with the leadoff panel tonight. It is a good one. Luke Broadwater is here, Pulitzer Prize-winning White House correspondent for the New York Times. Mark Joseph Stern, senior writer covering courts at the law and the law at Slate. And Mark McKinnon, former advisor to both George W. Bush and John McCain. Mr. Broadwater, I turn to you first. This is a lot of Epstein documents. What are you hearing on Capitol Hill? Where does this thing go next?
Yeah, well, if Donald Trump thought that he was going to move on from the Jeffrey Epstein files, clearly that is not the case. This is the story that's continuing to dog him. It's the story he badly wants to go away, and it's going nowhere. There's going to be more push to release more documents. As you know, Thomas Massie, the Republican from Kentucky, isn't stopping anytime soon, and he has more and more Republicans who are joining him to push for more and more documents to be released. And you can see why Donald Trump wants this story to go away. At every turn, when more documents are released, there's often information about him in those documents. There's this drawing in this case. We know they had a friendship for many years in which they associated and partied with various women together. So there's more testimony. There's more things in these files, and that's the last thing the Trump administration wants to be talking about.
Mr. McKinnon, where do you think this goes? I said it. The White House denies that the president wrote and signed that letter. Vice President Vance says it's BS and another fake scandal. Do you think that playbook is going to work for them in this particular situation?
Well, no, it's not, because this is something that the idea of this and what was behind it was literally fomented by the MAGA base. They're the ones who cared the most about Epstein and getting to the bottom of it. And this is a classic case where the administration has just made it worse and worse by delaying, denying, tactical interference, whatever. Listen, I don't think anybody would be surprised or bothered, mostly in the MAGA base, but a lot of Republicans, to say, yeah, he knew Jeffrey Epstein. He hung out with him. Yeah, there was a lot of banter and locker room stuff that went on, but he drew the line there. I think people would accept that and kind of move on. But for Trump to deny that, there was zero there. I mean, look at the video you've been playing of them hanging out together. I mean, it's just so obvious, and it's clear that when you got Nancy Mason, you got Marjorie Taylor Greene, you got Tom Massie, Republicans demanding the release of the file, this isn't going to end until it ends, and the end means the release of every single file.
Well, that will be an undertaking. Luke, your colleagues at the New York Times published this massive investigation on J.P. Morgan and Epstein. J.P. Morgan has to be furious over this. They have been desperately trying to move on from this. Jess Staley hasn't been involved in the banking years. But boom, this thing just came out tonight.
Yeah, and it just shows you as there's more focus on Jeffrey Epstein, and because this issue is staying alive, it's hitting other people too, right? This was incredible reporting from my colleagues. I encourage everyone to read this story. It's very detailed and lengthy, but it lays out in great detail all the steps the bank took to stay in business with Jeffrey Epstein, even as there were concerns about the allegations against him. And the bank kind of throws Staley under the bus in their comments and saying trust in him was misplaced, and he had sort of advocated for Jeffrey Epstein for the bank to remain in business with him. So they're sort of pointing the finger in that direction, but it's a bombshell piece of reporting, and I'd encourage everybody to read it.
Mark Joseph Stern, from a legal perspective, Donald Trump already launched a $10 billion lawsuit, right, against the paper, and he's going after the reporters personally. And yet, the Wall Street Journal decided to forge ahead in their reporting. What does that tell you?
It certainly tells us that the Wall Street Journal had a well-founded basis for the original report and for a follow-up reporting that we've seen. I mean, obviously, as you know, as we all know, any newsroom is going to be very careful when publishing these kind of bombshell allegations. They know they may face a defamation threat or even a suit from an individual as high profile as Donald Trump. If they move forward, we should assume that they are telling the truth, because that is how our industry works. You know, there is a high bar for winning a defamation claim when you are a public figure, but it is not insurmountable. And if Donald Trump and his administration were telling the truth, that the Wall Street Journal just made this up, that it were fabricated, that it were unfounded, that article never would have seen the light of day. And so I was not the least bit surprised to see this drawing and this letter come out. It seemed quite obvious to me from the start that it did exist, that the Wall Street Journal wouldn't have published it otherwise. And now I think there's actually a risk that Donald Trump could face what's known as an anti-SLAPP suit in the court, where he could wind up being penalized and essentially fined for trying to suppress free and fair news reporting about him as a public figure.
Well, that would be something. I do want to remind our audience of something we heard Republicans say over and over in the run-up to the 2024 election, how they were the party that protects women. Watch this.
We're going to also protect women from sex traffickers, domestic abusers, and those who coerce women into abortion, because it does happen and it shouldn't happen in this country.
The Republican Party will be the party that protects children from such an evil that I cannot believe it exists in this time.
I'm going to do it whether the women like it or not. I'm going to protect them. I think I'm going to protect the women, I'm going to protect the children, and I'm going to protect the men. I'm going to protect everybody. Is there any woman in the audience, please, that does not seek protection? Please raise your hand. Is there any woman in the audience that wants to be protected?
Now, today, the president talked about crime statistics in Washington, and I want to share what he says about what some would call domestic violence.
They said crime's down 87%. I said, no. It's more than 87%. Virtually nothing. And much lesser things that take place in the home they call crime. You know, they'll do anything they can to find something. If a man has a little fight with the wife, they say this was a crime, see? So now I can't claim 100%. But we are a safe city.
They'll look for anything to accuse a man of. He said that at an event at the Museum of the Bible. Now, given that President Trump says calls for more files to be released on Jeffrey Epstein are a Democrat hoax, and he said that just as the victims were publicly speaking. Mark McKinnon, what happened with this pledge? What happened with this pledge to protect women and girls?
Well, it got uncomfortable for him because it turns out that maybe he's associated with somebody who not only didn't protect them, but was a criminal monster that damaged hundreds of women's lives forever. And so I think it's interesting that, you have people like Nancy Mace, a strong MAGA Republican who left, a meeting with the victims in tears. So you've got people in the Republican Party in the base. It's not just Republicans. It's not a Democratic hoax. This was started by Republicans. So listen, it ain't going to bed until all the files are out, and it's not going to be just Democrats. It's going to be people in the Republican caucus that are yelling the loudest.
All right, let's have a new topic. Mark Joseph Stern, you know what you're here for. Supreme Court. Today, the court lifted limits on immigration patrols in Los Angeles. That sounds like a very big win for Donald Trump.
This is a huge win. It's exactly what his administration had been looking for. Back in July, a district court blocked the government from essentially racially profiling individuals in California in these immigration raids and sweeps. The court said you cannot arrest someone simply because they appear Latino or they're speaking Spanish or they're working a kind of job that immigrants tend to work. That is racial profiling, and it's a violation of the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution. It's an unreasonable seizure. That decision now has been lifted by the Supreme Court, which didn't bother to tell us why it intervened. It was a 6-3 vote over the shadow docket. So the majority didn't explain itself and say why it was taking this extraordinary step. But in doing so, it has freed the government to now move forward with overt racial profiling in California and likely other places as well, because this sends a message to all kinds of judges all throughout the country. If you try to stand in the way of these raids, if you try to hold ICE to even the most minimal constitutional standards under the Fourth Amendment, the Supreme Court will reverse you very quickly. And so I fear that this is the start of a new era of ICE patrols. They haven't been exactly subtle about the racial profiling so far, but they've at least pretended to be complying with what we knew is the law for many years. This feels like turning the page. And now they have the United States Supreme Court behind them, green lighting the kind of racial profiling that happens in, third world countries and tyrannical regimes that is often the start of even worse repression of racial minorities. Justice Sotomayor said that this condemns Latinos to second-class citizenship, that it will force them to all carry papers so they can prove that they belong here if they're stopped by ICE agents. And I think she's exactly right.